My name is Charmaine, 35 years old, and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful software developer, I escaped their toxicity but maintained occasional contact. Last Sunday, they invited me to an upscale brunch to catch up. Between mimosas and avocado toast, my mother leaned forward smirking. You know, Charmaine, you are lucky we even include you. Pity goes a long way. I simply sipped my coffee and smiled. That night, I logged in, disabled every family credit account, and emailed my lawyer about selling the cabin. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Fairfield, Connecticut meant privilege to outsiders. But inside our sprawling colonial home, emotional coldness permeated every corner. Our four-bedroom house, with its manicured lawn and heated swimming pool, was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet. My childhood bedroom, painted pale blue, at my mother Elaine's insistence despite my preference for green, became my sanctuary in prison. From elementary school through high school, I maintained straight A's, joined honor societies, and still, I was entirely invisible the moment my younger sister Dominique entered the room. Dominique was the golden child. Everything she did was celebrated. Fast forward to that same upscale Sunday brunch I just mentioned. My mother Elaine stood up, clinking her crystal champagne flute with her fork to get the attention of our private dining room. She beamed with pride, gesturing toward Dominique, who was sitting there adjusting her diamond necklace. I want to propose a toast, my mother announced loudly, making sure the waiters and nearby tables could hear. Let us raise our glasses to my beautiful daughter, Dominique. She just opened her second Lumiere Med Spa location. She achieved everything on her own without a single drop of help from anyone. A true self-made boss. The whole table clapped enthusiastically. My brother-in-law, Kendrick, cheered the loudest. I sat there gripping my napkin under the table, staring at the perfectly plated avocado toast in front of me. Self-made. The words echoed in my head. It took everything in me not to burst out laughing. Kendrick took a long sip of his mimosa, leaning back in his chair with a smug expression. He adjusted his designer sunglasses, which he insisted on wearing indoors. You know, Charmaine, Kendrick started, his voice dripping with condescension. You should really take some notes from your sister. I mean, sitting behind a computer screen writing code all day for some boring tech company must be exhausting. You are 35 and still working a 9-to-5 desk job. You need a billionaire mindset. Look at me. I made $10,000 this morning alone just trading crypto while sitting in bed. It is all about multiple streams of income. You are just not built for the entrepreneurial life. He crossed his legs proudly, displaying his brand new pair of Gucci loafers. He smirked at Dominique and she giggled, resting her head on his shoulder. My mother Elaine nodded in agreement, giving me a look of profound disappointment. I felt a familiar heat rise in my chest. What Kendrick did not know, and what he was too arrogant to ever figure out, was the reality of those Gucci loafers. Just 3 days prior, I had logged into the American Express portal to pay the minimum $5,000 balance on the family credit card. The exact same credit card that Kendrick had secretly charged those loafers to because his crypto wallet was completely empty. I was the one keeping his fake billionaire lifestyle afloat. I was the financial backbone of this entire family, operating in the shadows because my mother demanded I support my sister's dreams. But I kept my mouth shut, letting him enjoy his moment of delusion. I simply took another sip of my coffee, maintaining a completely neutral expression, seeing that her insults were not getting a reaction out of me. My mother Elaine decided to push harder. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick folder, tossing it onto the table right next to my plate. The folder slid and bumped against my water glass. "What is this?" I asked quietly. Elaine sighed loudly, rolling her eyes as if I were the biggest burden on the planet. "It is the dealership paperwork for a brand new Range Rover," she stated matter-of-factly. "Dominique needs a new company car to commute between her med spa locations. Since she is a business owner now, she needs to look the part. Her current Mercedes is already 2 years old, and it is embarrassing for her brand." I need you to sign as the primary guarantor on the auto loan. My jaw clenched. I looked from the paperwork to my mother, then to Dominique, who was busy taking a selfie for her social media followers. You want me to co-sign a $90,000 car loan for a business that I do not even own? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Elaine slammed her hand flat on the table, making the silverware rattle. Do not be so selfish, Charmaine, she snapped, her voice rising. It is just a signature on a piece of paper. Your sister is out here building an empire and making a name for our family, and all you do is sit alone in your apartment, hoarding your tech salary. You have no husband, no children, and no real responsibilities. The least you can do is support the sister who is actually doing something with her life. Stop being such a jealous, bitter spinster. You should be honored to help her. Kendrick chimed in, laughing under his breath. Yeah, Charmaine, do not be a hater just because your sister got all the talent and the looks. The sheer audacity of their words hung in the air. The entitlement was suffocating. For years I had swallowed my pride. For years I had quietly cleaned up their financial messes because I craved my mother's love and approval. But sitting there looking at these people who viewed me as nothing more than an ATM, something inside me finally snapped. The little girl who wanted her bedroom painted green was gone. The loyal daughter who craved a pat on the back was dead. I slowly picked up my napkin, wiped the corner of my mouth, and placed it neatly next to my plate. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not throw my drink in Kendrick's face, no matter how much he deserved it. I simply looked at my mother, then locked eyes with my sister Dominique. A calm, icy wave washed over me. You are absolutely right, Mom, I said smoothly. Dominique is a self-made boss. She has built an absolute empire. She is a powerhouse who does not need anyone's help, least of all from a bitter spinster like me. Dominique puffed out her chest, looking extremely pleased with herself. Finally, she said, tossing her hair over her shoulder. I am glad you are finally admitting the truth. It takes a big person to admit when they are outclassed. I smiled, a genuine bright smile that made Elaine narrow her eyes in confusion. Since you are so completely self-made, I continued, my voice dropping an octave, you will be perfectly fine without the $13,000 I transfer into your business account on the first of every month. The entire table froze. The color instantly drained from Dominique's face. Kendrick's smug smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer panic. What are you talking about? Elaine demanded, her voice suddenly shaking. I stood up from my chair, grabbing my purse. I am talking about the commercial lease for her med spa mom, the one I secretly signed for and pay for every single month because Dominique's credit score is worse than a college freshman's. I am talking about the payroll for her staff that I cover because her self-made business operates at a massive loss. So since she is doing so incredibly well, I am logging into my banking app right now. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. Autopay canceled. Lease guarantor status revoked. I dropped a $50 bill on the table to cover my coffee and toast. Good luck paying rent next week, self-made boss. I turned around and walked out of the restaurant, leaving them sitting there in absolute terrified silence. The empire was officially burning, and I was the one holding the match. As I stepped out into the crisp Sunday air, my phone began to vibrate violently in my hand. The fallout had already begun, but for the first time in my 35 years of life, I felt completely free from their endless emotional manipulation and selfish greed. By the time I slid into the driver's seat of my car and pressed the ignition, the digital screen on my dashboard illuminated with a terrifying rapid fire of notifications. 45 missed calls in the span of 6 minutes. The phone vibrated so intensely against the center console, it sounded like a drill. Most of the calls were from my mother, Elaine, but a few were from Dominique. I took a long, deep breath, letting the cool air conditioning wash over my face, and shifted the car into drive. I needed distance from that restaurant before I engaged. As I pulled out of the parking lot and merged onto the highway, a new notification popped up. It was a voicemail from Elaine. I pressed play, letting the audio connect through the car speakers. Her voice filled the cabin shrill and dripping with venom. Charmaine, you vindictive little brat! The voicemail began, her tone abandoning the refined persona she wore inside the restaurant. How dare you make a scene like that in public? You are a traitor to this family. Turn your car around right now, march back in here and apologize to your sister on your hands and knees. You know she needs that money. You know the immense stress she is under trying to build her brand. If you cut off those payments, you are dead to me. Do you hear me? Dead and completely cut off from this family. I reached over and deleted the message before she could scream another insult. Her words did not sting the way they used to. They just exhausted me. As I drove down the interstate, my mind drifted back to the reality of Dominique's supposed self-made empire. 3 years ago, Dominique was drowning. Her first attempt at running a boutique had completely tanked, leaving her drowning in debt and facing imminent bankruptcy. She had called me at 2 in the morning, sobbing hysterically on my couch, begging for a lifeline. Elaine had staged a massive panic attack, clutching her chest and crying that Dominique's failure would ruin the family name. Against my better judgment, I stepped in. I quietly negotiated with her creditors, paid off her immediate debts, using my own savings, and became the silent financial guarantor for her new venture, the Lumiere Med Spa. I signed the commercial lease because her credit was utterly destroyed. I set up the automated transfers to cover her exorbitant overhead. I did everything to keep her afloat, asking for zero recognition. All I wanted was for my sister to stabilize and for my mother to finally look at me with an ounce of pride. Instead, my financial rescue mission became their deepest secret. They completely erased my involvement from the narrative. Dominique rebranded herself as a fearless entrepreneur who built everything from the ground up, and Elaine happily sold that lie to everyone in our social circle. My reward for saving our family from financial ruin was being treated like a peasant allowed at their dinner table. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Those days were officially over. The days of me financing my own disrespect were finished. Just as I took the exit toward my neighborhood, my phone screen lit up with an incoming FaceTime audio call. I knew exactly what this was. They had taken a few minutes to recover from the shock, regrouped, and were now launching their counterattack. I tapped the screen to accept the call, leaving it on speakerphone. Well, 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 Kendrick's voice oozed through the speakers, dripping with smug confidence. That was quite the dramatic exit, Charmaine. Did you practice that little speech in the mirror this morning? I could hear Dominique laughing meanly in the background, the panic from the restaurant seemingly replaced by arrogant amusement. There was no speech, Kendrick, just a simple cancellation of services. Enjoy paying the commercial rent on the first of the month. Kendrick chuckled loudly, a grating sound that made my skin crawl. You see, Charmaine, that is where your little tantrum falls apart. You think you hold all the cards, but you are not thinking like a businessman. You are thinking like an emotional spinster. Enlighten me, Kendrick. Oh, I will, he replied eagerly. You just threatened to cut off the lease payments. But we both know the commercial lease for the med spa is fully in your name. You signed the guarantor paperwork 3 years ago to get the space. Dominique is just listed as the occupying tenant. If you stop the automatic payments, you are the one who defaults. The property management company will come after you, not us. They will evict the business, sure, but they will sue you for the remaining balance of the lease. Your precious, immaculate credit score will be completely ruined. Dominique chimed in, her voice shrill and triumphant. You would never let your credit score tank, Charmaine. You are too obsessed with your perfect little software developer life and clean background checks. So go ahead, stop paying. Watch what happens to your pristine financial record when a massive commercial default hits your file. We will just file for bankruptcy under the LLC, wipe our hands clean, and start over. You will be stuck holding the bag. They believed they had found the ultimate loophole to force me into continued submission. So turn the autopay back on Charmaine. And while you are at it, you are still going to co-sign for that Range Rover. Because if you do not, we will intentionally run the med spa into the ground, refuse to leave the building, and force a lengthy eviction process that will drain your bank account and drag your name through the mud. It is your choice. Pay up or burn your own life down. Are you finished? I asked calmly. Yeah, we are finished, Kendrick sneered. Glad you finally understand how the real world works. Good night, Kendrick, I replied and ended the call. I pulled into the underground parking garage of my apartment building and parked my car. I did not feel fear. I did not feel the crushing anxiety they intended to inflict upon me. Instead, a deep, satisfying warmth spread through my chest. They thought they were playing chess, but they were barely playing checkers. I took the elevator up to my floor, walked down the quiet hallway, and unlocked my front door. I dropped my keys on the kitchen counter, bypassed the living room entirely, and walked straight into my home office, approaching the heavy steel safe bolted to the floor in the corner. I typed in the 6-digit passcode, turned the heavy metal handle, and pulled the door open. Inside, stacked neatly next to my passports and emergency cash, was a thick manila envelope sealed with red wax. I carried it to my mahogany desk and broke the seal. I slid out a stack of crisp, legally binding real estate documents heavily stamped by the county clerk. The thick parchment paper felt incredibly heavy in my hands, a physical manifestation of the ultimate leverage I had quietly built while they were busy mocking me. Kendrick was right about one thing. I was a person who protected my financial stability above all else. But he drastically underestimated how much money a senior software developer actually made. He also underestimated my foresight. 6 months ago, the corporate real estate firm that owned the commercial plaza, where Dominique's med spa was located, decided to liquidate their smaller assets. They sent a private notice to all tenants offering to sell the individual buildings. Because my name was legally on the lease as the primary guarantor, the notice came directly to my home mailbox. Dominique and Kendrick never even saw it. At that time, my tech company had just gone public, and I had cashed out a significant portion of my vested shares. I had a massive, unprecedented amount of liquid capital sitting in high-yield savings accounts, waiting for an investment opportunity. So I made a move. I did not tell Elaine. I did not tell Dominique. I hired a proxy real estate attorney, created an anonymous holding company, and bought the entire commercial plaza in cash. I purchased the brick walls, the parking lot, and the land beneath it. I was no longer just the guarantor on my sister's commercial lease. I was the absolute legal owner of the property. I was the landlord. And because I owned the building outright, the property management company Kendrick was so terrified of did not exist anymore. I had fired them 2 months ago. If the med spa defaulted on rent, there would be no third party coming after my credit score. The only person owed money was me. I traced my finger over the embossed seal on the property deed, a slow smile creeping across my face. Kendrick thought he could threaten me with a drawn-out eviction process. He thought he could use my own pristine reputation as a weapon against me. But he had no idea that he was threatening the very person who held the master keys to his entire fake empire. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, grabbed my favorite fountain pen, and began drafting a formal notice to quit. They wanted to play hardball. That was fine. They were about to learn a very hard lesson about mistaking silent financial support for permanent weakness. The next morning arrived with the familiar heavy ringing of the church bells. I knew walking through those oak doors would be stepping directly into a war zone, but I refused to hide in my apartment. The moment my heels clicked against the polished marble floor of the foyer, the atmosphere shifted. The usual warm greetings and smiles vanished. Instead, a wall of cold stares greeted me. My mother, Elaine, had clearly been working the phone since our phone call ended the night before. Before I could even grab a weekly bulletin, Aunt Shirley and Aunt Patricia, the two most formidable gossips in the congregation, intercepted me near the coat check. Shirley crossed her arms, her oversized church hat bobbing with indignation. "Charmaine." She began, her voice loud enough to turn several heads in our direction. Your mother called me in absolute tears last night. I cannot believe you would try to steal your sister's business right out from under her. Patricia chimed in immediately, shaking her head in exaggerated disappointment. We watched you grow up in this church. We thought you were a good Christian woman. But to use your tech money to hold your own sister hostage, to try and rip a successful black-owned business away from your own flesh and blood because you are jealous. It is downright shameful. I stood still, letting their misplaced righteous anger wash over me. Elaine had spun a masterful narrative. She painted Dominique as the hard-working visionary, and me as the wealthy, bitter older sister trying to forcefully seize control of the med spa out of pure spite. They did not know about the $13,000 a month. They did not know about the auto loan for the Range Rover. They only knew the lie my mother had spoon-fed them to protect her golden child. "Excuse me, Aunt Shirley," I said, keeping my voice incredibly calm and even, "but you are operating on false information. I am not stealing anything. I am simply stepping back from financing a lifestyle I can no longer support." Shirley scoffed loudly, waving a hand in my face. "Do not lie in the house of the Lord, Charmaine. Your mother told us everything. She said you are demanding ownership of Dominique's company just because you helped her out with a few spreadsheets. You should be lifting your sister up, not tearing her down. We as a community have to stick together, and you are acting like an oppressor." The sheer manipulation of it all was breathtaking. Elaine had weaponized our community's core values against me, framing my financial boundaries as an attack on our shared culture and solidarity. People walking past us were whispering, shaking their heads as if I were a villain. I realized then that defending myself against Elaine's loyal foot soldiers would be a waste of breath. I stepped around Shirley and Patricia, making my way toward the sanctuary doors, but my path was blocked once again. This time it was Pastor Thomas. And standing right next to him, dabbing at her perfectly dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, was Dominique. Kendrick stood behind her, rubbing her shoulders in a pathetic display of supportive husband acting. Elaine flanked them on the right, looking like a grieving widow. Charmaine, Pastor Thomas said, his deep voice carrying a tone of gentle reprimand. "Your family asked me to intervene. They are incredibly distressed. Dominique tells me you are threatening to illegally evict her from her commercial space unless she signs her entire company over to you." Dominique let out a loud theatrical sob, burying her face in Kendrick's chest. "Pastor, I have worked so hard," she whimpered, making sure her voice projected across the increasingly crowded lobby. "I built Lumiere Med Spa from nothing. I put my blood, sweat, and tears into that brand. And now Charmaine wants to take it all away, just because she is mad she does not have a husband or a business of her own. I do not know what I did to make her hate me so much." Kendrick patted her back, looking at me with absolute disgust. "We are just trying to build generational wealth, Pastor. We are trying to be a positive example for the youth in this community. But Charmaine is using her corporate lawyers to bully us." The hypocrisy was so thick it was practically choking me. The man wearing shoes I was currently paying the minimum balance on was lecturing me about generational wealth. Pastor Thomas looked at me with deep sorrow. "Charmaine, the Bible teaches us to love one another, to support our family, to act with grace. I strongly urge you to drop this hostile takeover. Do not let greed destroy your soul. We can sit down in my office right now, pray on it, and you can sign whatever documents your sister needs to feel secure in her own business." The entire lobby had gone dead silent. Dozens of eyes were locked on me, waiting for me to break down, apologize, and surrender. They expected the guilt trip to work because it had always worked before. Elaine stood there with a triumphant smirk barely hidden beneath her tragic expression. She thought she had me checkmated. She thought public shaming in the one place I used to seek refuge would force me back into my designated role as the silent, compliant workhorse. But as I looked at the pastor, a man I had respected since childhood, and then at my sister, who was literally weaponizing her fake tears to steal my money, the last remaining thread connecting me to this toxic dynamic completely dissolved. I did not feel embarrassed. I did not feel defensive. I felt absolute crystal clear liberation. They were completely committed to their delusion, and nothing I said would change their minds. They did not want the truth. They wanted a villain to blame for their own failures. I looked directly into Pastor Thomas's eyes and offered him a polite, tight smile. "Pastor," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent lobby. "I respect you, and I respect this church. But I will not step into your office, and I will not pray over a situation that requires a forensic accountant, not a sermon. My sister is not a victim, she is a parasite, and my mother is her primary enabler." The entire church crowd gasped loudly in unison. Elaine's jaw dropped, her theatrical mourning instantly vanishing into genuine shock. "How dare you speak to me that way in the house of God?" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You are a wicked, ungrateful child." I took a step closer to my mother, completely ignoring her pointed finger. "The house of God is supposed to be built on truth, Mom. And the truth is, you have spent my entire life draining my resources to fund Dominique's delusions. But God sees everything, Elaine. He sees the pride. He sees the manipulation. And he certainly sees the financial fraud occurring behind closed doors." Kendrick's fake confident posture instantly rigidified at the mention of financial fraud. His eyes darted nervously toward the exit. Dominique stopped, her fake sobbing, staring at me with sudden raw panic. "What are you talking about?" Pastor Thomas asked, his tone shifting from reprimanding to confused. "I am talking about boundaries, Pastor," I replied smoothly. "I am talking about the fact that I am officially done. I will not sign anything. I will not fund them anymore. And I will not allow this family to use my own faith as a weapon to extort me." I turned my attention back to Elaine, Dominique, and Kendrick. "You wanted a villain?" I told them, my voice cold as ice. "Congratulations, you have one. Enjoy explaining to the congregation why the self-made boss is locking her doors next week." I turned around, my emerald dress swishing against my legs, and walked toward the heavy oak doors. Charmaine Elaine screamed behind me, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "If you walk out those doors, do not ever come back. You are no longer my daughter." I pushed the heavy doors open, stepping out into the bright Sunday sunlight. "I am fine with that," I said quietly to myself, though I knew she could not hear me. I walked down the concrete steps toward my car without looking back a single time. I had just excommunicated myself from the only community I had ever known, and I had just been disowned by my own mother. Yet, as I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat, I realized my hands were not shaking. My heart was not racing with anxiety. For the first time in my 35 years, my chest felt incredibly light. The smear campaign was in full effect, but it did not matter anymore. The toxic family matrix was finally shattered. Now it was time to let the legal documents do the talking. By the time I returned to my apartment, my phone was buzzing with a different kind of notification. It was not a text or a call from my mother. It was an alert from Instagram. I had created a burner account years ago to keep an eye on Dominique's business page, mostly to ensure the marketing dollars I was secretly funding were actually being put to use. The notification stated that Lumiere Med Spa was currently broadcasting a live video. I tapped the screen and watched as Dominique's tear-stained face filled my display. She was sitting in the plush waiting room of her clinic, the one I legally owned, wearing a designer silk robe. Over 50,000 people were tuned in, watching her perform the role of a lifetime. "Hey guys," she began, her voice trembling with perfectly calibrated vulnerability. "I usually like to keep things positive on here, but today I need to be real with you all. I am going through one of the hardest things a small business owner can face." A tear rolled down her cheek and she paused to wipe it away gently, ensuring her makeup remained flawless. "As you know, I built this med spa from nothing. I put my heart and soul into creating a safe space for our community. But right now, there is a toxic family member who is actively trying to destroy everything I have built." She looked directly into the camera, her eyes wide and pleading. I will not say her name because I do not want to sink to her level, but she is someone who has always been deeply jealous of my success. She works a miserable corporate job and cannot stand seeing me thrive as an independent entrepreneur. Now she is using her corporate wealth to exploit legal loopholes and threaten to shut down Lumiere Med Spa just to satisfy her own bitter ego. The comment section exploded. Hearts and angry emojis flooded the screen as her loyal followers rushed to her defense. People were typing furious messages, demanding to know who this evil sister was and offering their unwavering support. Dominique sniffled, playing the wounded gazelle flawlessly. "It breaks my heart because I love my family," she continued softly. "But sometimes the people who share your blood are the ones who want to see you fail the most. I am fighting back, guys. I am not going to let this jealous, toxic woman steal my dream or take away the sanctuary I created for all of you. Please keep my business in your prayers today." I closed the app, tossing my phone onto the couch. She was attempting to use her digital army to intimidate me, twisting the narrative so completely that her own financial incompetence was masked by a fabricated tale of my supposed jealousy. It was a brilliant, highly manipulative public relations move designed to paint me into a corner while elevating her saintly image even further into the stratosphere of social media perfection today. The real-world consequences of Dominique's social media performance hit me the very next morning at work. I arrived at the sleek glass building of my tech company, grabbed a coffee, and sat down at my desk to review my code. Within an hour, my inbox started filling up with automated alerts from our corporate public relations team. Someone had managed to identify me from Dominique's digital breadcrumbs. Her followers had discovered my LinkedIn profile and immediately launched a coordinated attack against my employer. They were flooding the company's Google reviews and social media pages with one-star ratings, claiming that the firm employed a toxic, abusive software developer who stole from small businesses. By noon, the situation escalated. My desk phone rang, displaying the extension of our Vice President of Engineering, Mr. Sterling. "Charmaine, I need you in my office right now," he said, his tone entirely devoid of its usual warmth. When I walked into his corner office, he was staring at his monitor, a deep frown etched into his forehead. "Close the door," he instructed softly. He turned his screen toward me, displaying a flood of hateful comments tagging our corporate accounts. "We are getting hundreds of these messages every single hour. People are demanding that we terminate your employment immediately because you are allegedly attempting to ruin a local minority-owned business. Care to explain what is happening here?" I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Dominique had crossed a massive line. She was no longer just whining to our mother. She was actively jeopardizing the career I had spent 10 grueling years building. "Mr. Sterling, I assure you this is an entirely private family matter," I explained, keeping my voice steady, despite the anger boiling beneath my skin. "My sister is facing eviction from a commercial property that I legally own, and she has decided to weaponize her internet following to intimidate me into giving her the building for free." Sterling sighed, rubbing his temples. "I believe you, Charmaine. You have been a stellar employee, and your professional record is flawless. However, the optics of this are terrible for our brand. We are about to launch a massive new software product, and our marketing department is panicking over this sudden negative publicity. I cannot have our investors seeing headlines about our lead developer terrorizing small businesses. I need you to resolve this situation immediately, or the board might force my hand to place you on administrative leave until the heat dies down." Walking back to my desk, my vision practically blurred with rage. Dominique knew exactly what she was doing. She knew how much my career meant to me, and she was banking on the fact that I would cave to corporate pressure. They wanted to attack my livelihood to save their own sinking ship. It was a vicious, unhinged escalation that completely eradicated whatever lingering sympathy I had left for her and my entire biological family members forever from my whole life. Just as I sat down at my desk and took a deep breath to steady my shaking hands, my phone buzzed again. It was a text message from Kendrick. Attached to the message was a PDF file titled "Cease and Desist." I clicked the document open, scanning the text with an incredulous eye. It was a poorly drafted, completely fake legal letter written on what looked like a Microsoft Word template. It stated that if I did not immediately sign over the deed to the commercial plaza to Lumiere Medspa LLC, they would file a massive defamation and emotional distress lawsuit against me. The text message that followed the attachment was even more absurd. "See that Charmaine," Kendrick wrote. We have retained top-tier legal counsel. Dominique is emotionally traumatized, and your little stunt is costing us thousands in potential revenue. If you do not sign the building over to us by 5 o'clock today, we are going to war. We will drag your name through the mud, tag your boss in every single post, and make sure you never write another line of code in this city again. Hand over the property, and we will tell the followers to back off. Your choice. I stared at the screen, a cold, calculating calm washing over me. They genuinely thought I was stupid. They believed that a fake legal document and an online mob could bully me into surrendering an asset worth millions of dollars. They thought they had backed me into a corner where my only option was submission to save my job. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. By threatening my career, they had removed the final barrier of restraint I was holding on to. I no longer cared about protecting my mother from heartbreak. I no longer cared about keeping the family's secrets hidden behind closed doors to preserve their fragile egos. If they wanted to go to war, I was going to bring a nuclear arsenal to a knife fight. I picked up my phone and forwarded the fake legal document directly to my actual attorney. Then I closed out of my coding software and opened a secured encrypted portal. As the original financial guarantor for the med spa, I still had full administrative access to all of their banking records, payroll accounts, and credit card statements. For 3 years, I had deliberately avoided looking at their spending habits out of a misplaced sense of respect for their privacy. I had just blindly paid the $13,000 deficit every month. But now the gloves were entirely off. I typed in my password, hit enter, and watched as the raw financial data of Lumiere Med Spa loaded onto my dual monitors. It was time to find out exactly where my money had been going. It was time to systematically dismantle the self-made empire piece by piece, and I was going to enjoy it very much until they had absolutely nothing left to steal from me today, whatsoever. The screen illuminated my dark office with a harsh white glow as the financial dashboard for Lumiere Med Spa loaded. Because I had signed on as the primary financial guarantor 3 years ago, I possessed master administrative access to every single bank account, credit line, and vendor portal tied to the business. Dominique and Kendrick were far too arrogant and financially illiterate to ever think about revoking my access or changing the primary passwords. They simply assumed I would keep paying the bills and never dare to look behind the curtain. I opened my professional auditing software and began importing the raw data. It was time to conduct a forensic deep dive. I started by pulling the last 36 months of bank statements, tax filings, and payroll registers. My eyes scanned the columns of numbers, moving with the practiced speed of a senior software developer with an extensive background in financial data systems. I isolated the gross revenue first. Surprisingly, the med spa was not entirely failing on its own. Dominique actually had a decent client base coming in for expensive skin treatments and injections. The business was generating enough gross income to cover its basic operating expenses. But the net cash flow was a completely different story. The accounts were bleeding money at an astonishing rate. I cross-referenced the daily incoming revenue against the outgoing vendor payments. None of the math aligned. Invoices for medical supplies were marked as unpaid for over 90 days. The electricity and utility bills for the commercial space were consistently paid late, incurring massive penalty fees. The front desk staff and estheticians were being paid from a secondary account that was constantly overdrawn. I narrowed my focus and ran a specific query for the exact $13,000 transfers I had been sending on the first of every month. I had always assumed that money was automatically routed to the commercial landlord and the payroll service provider. I was wrong. As soon as my $13,000 hit the primary business checking account, an automated sweep protocol transferred the entire amount into a separate external account. I traced the routing number of that external account. It did not belong to a vendor. It did not belong to a payroll company. It was a private checking account registered solely in Kendrick's name. He had completely bypassed the business ledger. He was systematically siphoning my money the exact second it arrived. I felt a cold surge of adrenaline. This was not just poor business management. This was calculated embezzlement. I clicked into Kendrick's private account ledger to see exactly where my hard-earned salary had been going. The spending history on Kendrick's private account was a masterclass in absolute financial recklessness. I scrolled through page after page of transaction logs, watching my money evaporate into a void of pure vanity. There were massive charges at luxury boutiques, $5,000 at Gucci, $3,000 at Louis Vuitton, $7,000 at a custom jeweler in downtown Atlanta. Kendrick was using my monthly deposits to fund his entire fake billionaire aesthetic. He was leasing the designer clothes he bragged about at Sunday brunch. He was paying exorbitant daily rates for luxury rental cars just to shoot 10-second videos for his social media profiles pretending he owned them. I also found the deposits he had boasted about making from his crypto trading. They were entirely fabricated. He was transferring money from the MedSpa account into his crypto wallet, losing it on terrible trades, and then transferring small amounts back to make it look like he was generating a profit. But the most damning discovery was buried in the recurring monthly transfers. Every single month on the fifth day, exactly $8,000 was wired from Kendrick's account to a recipient listed only as Destiny in Miami, Florida. I raised an eyebrow, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I initiated a deeper search into this mysterious payee. I cross-referenced the wire transfers with his credit card statements. The picture became disgustingly clear. Whenever Kendrick told my sister he was traveling to Florida for a crypto convention or a real estate seminar, he was actually flying first class to Miami to visit Destiny. I found charges for luxury oceanfront hotel suites, expensive dinners at exclusive steakhouses, and thousands of dollars spent at high-end nightclubs. There were receipts for designer handbags and spa days shipped directly to a residential address in South Beach. Kendrick was not just a scammer. He was funding an entirely separate life and a very expensive mistress, using the money I sent to keep my sister's business from collapsing. He stood in my mother's church and lectured me about generational wealth, while secretly draining our family resources to pay a woman in Miami $8,000 a month. Dominique was utterly clueless. She was so obsessed with her social media image and playing the role of the perfect power couple that she never bothered to look at the bank statements. She let him handle the finances because it fit her narrative of having a successful, wealthy husband taking care of her. She was defending a man who was publicly humiliating her behind her back. I took screenshots of every single transaction, every hotel receipt, and every wire transfer to Destiny. I compiled them into a secure encrypted folder on my hard drive. But as I reviewed the final ledger, I noticed one remaining glaring anomaly that made my blood run completely cold. The math still did not make sense. Even with my $13,000 a month and the med spa revenue, Kendrick was spending way more money than the accounts were bringing in. There had to be another massive source of capital funding his delusion. I went back to the main search portal and ran a comprehensive liability check on Lumiere MedSpa LLC. I pulled a full commercial credit report for the business entity, holding my breath as the document generated on my screen. When the liability page loaded, my eyes instantly locked onto a massive, glaring red flag. 6 months ago, a commercial lending firm had issued a high-risk business loan to Lumiere MedSpa in the amount of $150,000. I stared at the screen in complete disbelief. With the terrible credit scores, both Dominique and Kendrick possessed. No legitimate bank would ever approve a loan of that magnitude without substantial collateral. I clicked on the loan details, downloading the original promissory note and the attached collateral agreements. As I read the fine print, a wave of profound nausea washed over me. The collateral listed for the $150,000 loan was not business equipment or commercial real estate. It was residential real estate. I scrolled down to the property deed attached to the loan application. It was the sprawling 4-bedroom colonial home in Fairfield, Connecticut. My mother's house. The house my father had worked his entire life to pay off before he passed away. I looked closely at the signature line on the loan documents. There, scrawled in black ink, was my mother Elaine's signature. But I knew my mother's handwriting better than I knew my own, and this was a blatant, sloppy forgery. Kendrick had used his proximity to the family to steal Elaine's social security number and financial details. He had forged her signature on a legally binding document and used the completely paid-off family home to secure a predatory loan with a brutal variable interest rate. He had taken out a massive second mortgage on my mother's house without her having any idea. I checked the payment history for the loan. Kendrick had made the first 2 payments using the loan funds themselves, but after that the payments stopped entirely. The loan was currently 4 months in default. I opened a new tab and accessed the county public records database for Fairfield. I typed in my mother's address and hit search. The result felt like a physical punch to the gut. A notice of default and intent to foreclose had been officially filed by the lending institution just 3 days ago. Elaine thought Kendrick was a brilliant investor. She bragged to the entire church congregation about his billionaire mindset. She disowned me because I refused to fund his lifestyle. And right at this very moment, she was living in a house that the bank was preparing to seize. Kendrick had not just stolen from me. He had financially ruined the woman who defended him the most. The sheer magnitude of his betrayal was staggering. He was a parasite who had attached himself to our family and drained us dry. I sat back in my chair staring at the digital evidence of my family's complete financial destruction. They had sent me a fake cease and desist letter to intimidate me into handing over a multi-million-dollar commercial plaza. They had tried to destroy my career to save their egos. Now I held the absolute power to send Kendrick to federal prison and expose Dominique's perfect life as a complete fraud. I saved the forged loan documents and the foreclosure notice into the encrypted folder next to the receipts from Miami. I carefully closed out of the banking portals and shut down my computer. The audit was complete. I knew exactly what I had to do next. It was time to let them dig their own graves entirely before I dropped the dirt on them. The very next morning, my personal phone buzzed with an unexpected and lengthy text message from my mother, Elaine. It was a stark departure from her usual vitriol. She asked me to meet her at a quiet cafe downtown for a peace treaty lunch, claiming she wanted to smooth things over before the family fractured beyond repair. I knew far better than to ever believe her sudden change of heart, but morbid curiosity coupled with the devastating financial secrets I now held compelled me to agree. I arrived at the cafe and found her sitting in a secluded corner booth sipping a sparkling water. She wore a perfectly pressed pastel pink suit, looking every bit the pristine, untouchable church matriarch. As I slid into the booth across from her, she offered a tight, extremely practiced smile. "Charmaine." She began reaching across the table to pat my hand condescendingly. "I think we all let our emotions get the better of us at brunch. Your sister is under a lot of pressure, and perhaps we approached you the wrong way." I withdrew my hand, waiting for the inevitable catch. There was always a catch. "I am listening, Mom," I said flatly. Elaine cleared her throat, leaning in closer. "Dominique has a vision, Charmaine. She wants to expand Lumiere Med Spa, open a third location, and really cement her legacy. But with the current cash flow situation, and with you throwing your little temper tantrum about the commercial lease payments, she is simply in a temporary bind. Kendrick is tying up most of their liquid capital in a massive new cryptocurrency venture that will pay off tenfold by next year. But right now, they need a bridge." I just stared directly at her, genuinely astounded by her sheer audacity. "You invited me here to ask for more money," I asked, my voice dangerously low. Elaine frowned, clearly annoyed that I was not eagerly opening my checkbook. "I am not asking for a handout, Charmaine. I am offering you an investment opportunity in your own family. You have a massive 401k sitting there doing nothing. You are single, you have no dependents, and you do not need all that retirement money right now. I want you to liquidate a portion of your 401k and invest it directly into Dominique's expansion. It is the Christian thing to do. She will pay you back with interest once Kendrick's investments clear." The sheer delusion was breathtaking. She had literally disowned me less than 48 hours ago in the middle of a church lobby, and now she was demanding I gut my own retirement savings to fund a fake business and a cheating husband. She was literally asking me to set myself completely on fire just to keep her golden child warm. I looked at the woman who had birthed me feeling absolutely nothing but cold pity. She was completely trapped in a web of lies she helped spin, totally unaware that the spider was currently draining her own lifeblood. I took a slow sip of my coffee, considering my next words. I had the digital folder with her forged signature sitting on my phone. A part of me wanted to break the spell she was under and prove that the man she worshipped was actively destroying her life. Mom. I started keeping my tone perfectly measured. You need to look closer at Kendrick. You are putting absolute faith in a man who is not who he claims to be. The med spa is not expanding, and he is not a cryptocurrency genius. He bleeds Dominique dry. Elaine's face instantly hardened. Her fake smile vanished, replaced by the familiar disdain she reserved for me. Do not start with your jealous lies again, Charmaine. I will not sit here and listen to you slander your brother-in-law. He is a brilliant investor. He is a provider. He gives your sister a beautiful life, something you are clearly too bitter to understand. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. Mom, please listen to me for 1 minute. Kendrick is hiding massive debts. He is taking out loans using collateral that does not belong to him. If you do not distance yourself from his finances right now, you are going to lose everything. You could lose your house. It was a direct warning, the clearest lifeline I could possibly throw her without revealing my entire hand. But Elaine did not hear a warning. She only heard an attack on her perfect family facade. She slammed her hand on the table, causing the silverware to rattle loudly. "Stop it right now!" she hissed, her eyes blazing with fury. "You are pathetic, Charmaine. You are so desperate to drag Dominique down to your miserable level that you would make up vicious lies about her husband. Kendrick is a visionary. He just secured a massive influx of capital for the business all on his own without your help. You are just mad that they do not need your little handouts anymore." I felt a sharp pang of irony. The massive influx of capital she was bragging about was the predatory loan he had illegally taken out against her own home. She was literally defending the instrument of her own financial ruin. I realized then that saving her was impossible. She was a willing victim, too, intoxicated by the illusion of status, to ever accept the truth from the daughter she despised. "Fine," I said softly, picking up my purse. "I warned you. Remember this conversation, Mom. Remember that I tried to tell you." Elaine scoffed, crossing her arms. "The only thing I will remember is how you refused to support your family when we offered you an olive branch. Do not bother coming to the Med Spa grand reopening party next week. You are officially uninvited." I stood up from the booth, looking at her one last time. "Oh, do not worry, Mom," I replied, a small cold smile forming on my lips. I would not miss that party for the world. I walked out of the cafe and into the bright afternoon sun, leaving my mother sitting in her self-righteous delusion. The final shred of guilt I had been carrying evaporated completely. I had given her a chance to see the truth, and she had violently rejected it to protect her golden child's false reality. There was no more room for hesitation. I drove straight back to my secure apartment and immediately booted up my desktop computer. I opened the encrypted folder containing the property deed to the commercial plaza and pulled up a blank legal template. It was time to execute the eviction. Because Dominique was legally operating as a commercial tenant without a renewed lease agreement, and because the automatic rent payments had officially bounced that morning, I had the absolute legal right to initiate an immediate lockout. I carefully and meticulously filled out the formal 7-day notice to quit. I detailed the exact amount of unpaid rent, the violation of the lease terms, and the mandatory date of vacating the premises. But I made one crucial strategic decision. I did not put my own name on the eviction notice. I listed the anonymous holding company I had created when I purchased the building. I wanted the element of surprise to be absolute. I wanted them to think they were fighting a faceless corporate entity right up until the very last second. I printed the official legal documents, signed them as the authorized managing member of the holding company, and stamped them firmly with my corporate seal. I then immediately picked up my phone and called a private process server I had used in the past for corporate disputes. A man named Thomas, a retired police officer who specialized in high-conflict document delivery, answered the phone. I explained the situation, emphasizing that the documents needed to be served directly to Dominique at the Lumiere Med Spa location before the close of business that day. I quickly wired him his standard fee, plus a very substantial rush bonus. Within 2 hours, Thomas sent me a text message confirming the delivery. He noted that a very angry man, wearing a Gucci tracksuit, had tried to throw the paperwork back at him, but the legal service was complete. The countdown had officially started. They had exactly 7 days to pack up their equipment and vacate my building. Of course, I knew they would not leave. Their massive collective ego would simply never allow it. Dominique and Kendrick would view the anonymous eviction notice as a bluff, a mere clerical error they could easily ignore or bully their way out of. They were planning a massive, lavish, grand reopening party for the exact day the eviction notice expired. They were going to fill my building with investors, local influencers, and their entire fake social circle. They were setting the perfect stage for their own ultimate public destruction, and I was going completely out of my way to make sure the final curtain dropped exactly on schedule. When the retired police officer handed Dominique the formal eviction notice at the front desk of Lumiere Med Spa, her reaction was predictable. I watched the security footage later through my administrative portal. She barely even glanced at the legal jargon. She scoffed, tossed the heavy packet onto the reception desk, and immediately returned to scrolling on her phone. In her deeply distorted version of reality, landlords did not actually evict businesses that looked as glamorous as hers. She convinced herself and Kendrick that the anonymous holding company listed on the document was simply posturing, trying to strong-arm them into signing a new lease with a higher monthly rate. Instead of calling a lawyer or packing up the expensive laser equipment, Dominique decided to double down on her absolute delusion. She firmly believed that if she just looked successful enough, the problems would magically disappear. The eviction notice explicitly stated they had exactly 7 days to vacate, which perfectly coincided with the date of her highly anticipated grand reopening and investor mixer. So rather than saving her remaining funds, she drained the very last drops of her available credit. I monitored the financial dashboard as she maxed out 3 different high-interest credit cards in a span of 48 hours. She hired a premium event planning company to transform the med spa into a luxury nightclub environment. She ordered massive floral arrangements consisting of hundreds of white roses, a custom champagne tower, and a red carpet to be rolled out across the sidewalk. She even hired a team of private security guards to stand at the doors, completely oblivious to the fact that she was going to need protection from her own financial crimes, not from uninvited party crashers. Dominique's strategy was as transparent as it was desperate. She needed to trap new money. She had sent out sleek, embossed invitations to local athletes, minor celebrities, and wealthy members of my mother Elaine's congregation. Her plan was to dazzle them with the illusion of a thriving, highly profitable aesthetic empire and pressure them into signing massive investment checks before the night ended. She thought those checks would allow her to pay off the mysterious landlord and keep her fake billionaire lifestyle fully intact. She spent her days aggressively promoting the party on social media, completely ignoring the legal time bomb ticking down right under her manicured fingernails. It was a spectacular display of willful ignorance. Every new swipe of her credit card dug her grave a little deeper. She was meticulously decorating the very room where her entire life was about to violently collapse. The sheer scale of her denial was almost impressive, but it only fueled my determination to see this through to the absolute end. The trap was fully set, and the mice were busy spending everything on expensive cheese. They were genuinely convinced they were completely untouchable. While Dominique was busy bankrupting herself on floral arrangements and champagne, Kendrick was orchestrating his own masterclass in extreme arrogance. If Dominique's delusion was rooted in maintaining her social status, Kendrick's delusion was driven by pure, unfiltered ego. He needed to prove to the entire city of Atlanta that he was the apex predator of the cryptocurrency world, regardless of the fact that his bank accounts were entirely hollow. Early on, the day before the grand reopening, I received a notification from one of the luxury car rental agencies in the city. Because my name was still technically tied to the primary business credit profile, I could see the authorization holds as they hit the system. Kendrick had just authorized a massive security deposit to secure a pristine midnight black Rolls-Royce Cullinan for the weekend. The daily rental rate alone was astronomical, completely wiping out whatever meager cash reserves he had left after sending his monthly wire transfer to his mistress Destiny in Miami. But Kendrick did not care about the cost. He only cared about flashy optics he presented online. Within hours of picking up the vehicle, he went live on his Instagram page. I sat in my home office watching the broadcast on my burner account with a mixture of disgust and absolute amusement. Kendrick was sitting in the driver's seat of the Rolls-Royce, wearing a brand new designer tracksuit and flashing a thick stack of $100 bills that I knew for a fact were freshly withdrawn from the med spa's dwindling operating account. The starry night headliner of the luxury SUV glowed brightly above him as he smirked into the camera lens. "Listen up, everybody," Kendrick boasted, his voice loud and obnoxiously confident. "Tomorrow night is going to be a movie. We are shutting down the entire city for the Lumiere Med Spa expansion party. This is what generational wealth looks like. This is what happens when you ignore the broke haters and focus strictly on your grind." He paused to rev the massive engine, laughing as the sound vibrated through the phone speaker. "To all the bitter people out there who thought they could stop our shine, just look at this. You cannot stop a boss. We are playing chess while you are still struggling to understand checkers. Pull up tomorrow night if you want to see how real money moves. But bring your checkbooks because the price of admission to our circle just went way up." He ended the live stream with a smug grin that made me want to smash my monitor. The sheer audacity of his entire performance was truly staggering. He was sitting in a rented vehicle funded by stolen money, mocking the very person who legally owned the ground he parked on. His arrogance was a blinding force, preventing him from seeing the absolute devastation that was rapidly accelerating toward him. He had chosen to loudly insult the architect of his impending downfall, effectively sealing his fate completely forever. While they were busy preparing for the party of the decade, I was busy finalizing the logistics of their absolute destruction. The 7-day grace period outlined in the eviction notice officially expired at exactly 5 o'clock on the evening of their grand reopening. They had failed to vacate, which meant they were now legally trespassing on my commercial property. I did not waste any time. On the morning of the event, I drove directly to the local sheriff's department carrying a thick, meticulously organized legal binder. I walked into the Civil Processing Division and requested an immediate meeting with the commanding officer on duty. When I was ushered into the office of a stern-looking lieutenant, I placed the binder on his desk. Inside were the certified copies of my property deed, the official corporate registration of my holding company, the signed affidavit from the process server proving Dominique had received the notice, and the expired eviction mandate. I explained the situation calmly and professionally. I informed him that the tenants had flagrantly ignored a lawful order to vacate and were currently planning to host a massive unauthorized gathering on my property that evening, complete with alcohol and private security. Because I was the legal landlord and the eviction period had fully lapsed, I had the right to secure my premises and lock them out. However, given Kendrick's volatile nature and the high likelihood of a public disturbance, I formally requested a police escort to execute the lockout. The lieutenant reviewed my documents carefully, nodding as he verified the county stamps and the dates. "You have all your ducks in a row, miss," he confirmed, closing the binder. "Since the notice has expired and this is a commercial property, they are legally trespassing as of 5 o'clock tonight. We can absolutely provide deputies to ensure the peace is kept while you change the locks and secure your asset." I thanked him and we coordinated the exact timing. I wanted maximum impact. I did not want to shut them down before the party started. I wanted the investors to be present. I wanted the cameras to be rolling. I scheduled the police escort to arrive at the med spa at exactly 8 o'clock, right in the middle of Kendrick's big speech. Before leaving the station, I made one final phone call to a commercial locksmith, booking him to meet us at the property. Everything was perfectly aligned. Dominique and Kendrick had built a towering house of cards, and they had proudly invited the entire city to come watch it stand. They had no idea that a massive hurricane was currently forming right outside their newly polished glass doors. I drove home, carefully laid out my sharpest, most powerful business suit, and poured myself a glass of expensive wine. I was not merely going to shut down their highly anticipated party. I was going to systematically dismantle their entire fake lives in front of everyone they were trying so desperately to impress. By 8 o'clock that evening, Lumiere Med Spa was completely unrecognizable from its usual sterile clinical aesthetic. Dominique had spared absolutely no expense in her desperate bid to project an image of overwhelming success. The sprawling waiting room and reception area had been transformed into a pulsing luxury nightclub. Neon signs displaying the company logo cast a pink and purple glow over the massive crowd. A thumping bass line from a hired celebrity DJ vibrated through the floorboards. The room was packed shoulder to shoulder with the exact demographic she needed to impress. There were local Atlanta influencers live streaming from the custom photo booth holding flutes of expensive champagne. There were several minor professional athletes wearing heavy diamond chains mingling near the buffet of high-end catered appetizers. And scattered throughout the room, looking slightly out of place, but deeply eager to be associated with wealth, were the most prominent members of my mother's church congregation. Pastor Thomas was there wearing a sharp suit and nodding approvingly as he surveyed the extravagant display. But the true star of the completely fabricated show was my mother, Elaine. She was parading through the crowd, wearing a brand new floor-length silver sequin gown that caught the neon light with every step she took. She held a crystal champagne flute in one hand and used the other to dramatically gesture as she spoke to a group of potential angel investors. She was in her absolute element, playing the role of the proud matriarch to absolute perfection. I watched the scene unfold from the tinted windows of my parked car across the street, viewing snippets of the party through the large glass storefront. I could clearly see Kendrick holding court near the DJ booth. He was still wearing the same designer tracksuit he had flaunted online earlier, leaning casually against a high-top table. He was speaking animatedly to two older businessmen, undoubtedly spinning a web of lies about his massive cryptocurrency portfolio and the guaranteed return on investment they would receive if they funded Dominique's fictitious expansion. Dominique herself was fluttering between groups, wearing a custom white silk dress, her smile so bright and forced it looked painful. She was pointing out the new laser machines and gesturing toward the architectural renderings of her supposed third location. The atmosphere was thick with arrogance and the desperate smell of newly minted fraud. Every single person in that room believed they were standing on the ground floor of a massive empire. They were totally captivated by the illusion of success, completely blinded by the flashing lights and the free-flowing liquor. It was a masterpiece of social manipulation, funded entirely by stolen credit and forged signatures. I checked the glowing digital clock on my dashboard. It was 8:15. The deputies had just pulled up behind me in two marked patrol vehicles. I stepped out of my car, smoothing my tailored black blazer. It was time to pull the fire alarm on their perfect little party. The cool evening air rushed past me as I crossed the street, flanked by the two uniformed sheriff's deputies and a commercial locksmith carrying a heavy steel toolbox. The private security guards standing outside the glass doors of Lumiere Med Spa immediately stiffened as we approached. They were large men wearing cheap earpieces, but they were not foolish enough to physically challenge armed law enforcement officers. The lead deputy, a tall man named Harris, simply flashed his bright gold badge and offered a stern nod. The security guards immediately stepped aside, holding the heavy glass doors open for us to enter the building. The moment we crossed the threshold, the sheer volume of the party hit me like a physical wall. The bass from the DJ booth rattled the decorative mirrors on the walls, and the scent of expensive perfume mixed with the sharp odor of alcohol was overwhelming. The crowd was so dense that nobody immediately noticed our arrival. People were too busy laughing, taking flash photographs, and clinking their crystal glasses together to pay attention to the front entrance. I walked straight past the custom champagne tower, maintaining a steady, purposeful stride. The deputies flanked me closely on either side, their hands resting naturally near their duty belts. The locksmith followed right behind us, his toolbox clanking softly against his leg. We navigated through the sea of sequined dresses and tailored suits, parting the crowd like a heavy ship moving through shallow water. A few of the church members recognized me. Aunt Shirley practically dropped her appetizer plate, her eyes widening in absolute horror as she took in the sight of the police uniforms escorting me. Whispers immediately began to ripple outward from where we walked, rapidly spreading through the room like a sudden drop in atmospheric pressure. By the time we reached the absolute center of the main reception floor, the entire dynamic of the room had shifted. The loud laughter began to falter, replaced by a confused, nervous murmuring. I stopped right in front of the elevated platform where the DJ had set up his massive sound system. I looked up at him, making direct, unwavering eye contact. He was wearing heavy headphones and bobbing his head to the beat, completely oblivious to the rising tension. Deputy Harris stepped forward, reached over the velvet rope separating the booth from the dance floor, and firmly tapped the DJ on the shoulder. The music abruptly cut off. The sudden deafening silence that followed was incredibly jarring. The residual ringing in my ears was the only sound in the room for a long, agonizing second. Then a collective gasp swept through the crowd of nearly 200 guests. Every single head in the room turned to face us. The glamorous facade was instantly shattered by the stark reality of the flashing police radios and the heavy presence of the law. The party was officially over. I stood perfectly still under the bright pink neon lights, waiting for the inevitable explosion. Dominique was the first person to break the suffocating silence. She shoved through a group of stunned investors, her custom white silk dress swirling furiously around her ankles. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at my face, her voice echoing shrilly throughout the completely quiet room. "Security!" She screamed at the top of her lungs, her eyes wide and manic. "Get this bitter woman out of my building now. She is trespassing. I want her physically removed from my property." The security guards standing near the entrance did not move a single muscle. They simply stared at the armed deputies standing firmly by my side. Kendrick was hot on her heels, pushing past Pastor Thomas with his chest puffed out aggressively. He marched right up to where we were standing, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. He glared down at me, completely ignoring the officers. "What the hell do you think you are doing, Charmaine?" he hissed, leaning in so close I could smell the expensive bourbon on his breath. "You are completely out of your mind if you think you can crash our corporate event. I am calling my lawyers right now. You are going to be arrested for criminal trespassing and corporate sabotage. I am going to make sure you rot in a jail cell for ruining our night." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked at his rented designer tracksuit, then at Dominique's incredibly expensive dress, and finally at my mother Elaine, who was currently frozen in shock near the catering tables. The sheer arrogance was almost beautiful in its absolute blindness. They still firmly believed they were the ones holding all the power. They genuinely thought their fake legal threats and loud voices could bully reality into bending to their will. A slow, incredibly calm smile spread across my face. I reached into my leather portfolio and pulled out the wireless microphone I had quietly taken from the DJ booth during the initial confusion. I turned the power switch on and tapped the metallic grill twice. The sharp thumping sound echoed loudly through the massive speakers, ensuring that every single person in the crowded room was hanging on to my every word. "I am not leaving," I said, my voice projecting clearly and smoothly over the sound system. "And nobody is arresting me, Kendrick." I turned toward Deputy Harris, who was watching the meltdown with a look of extreme professional boredom. I politely extended the microphone toward him. "Deputy, would you mind explaining to these people exactly who is trespassing here tonight?" Harris took the microphone, clearing his throat loudly. He pulled a folded legal document from his breast pocket and held it up for the entire crowd to see. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, his deep voice commanding absolute authority. We are here executing a lawful eviction order. The tenants of this commercial space have failed to vacate. Kendrick burst into a loud, theatrical fit of laughter that echoed awkwardly across the silent room. He shook his head, looking at the deputy as if the man had just told a hilarious joke. Officer, you have been severely misinformed, Kendrick said, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. He pointed a finger at me. This woman right here is not the landlord. She is just the financial guarantor on our lease. She got a little upset about a family disagreement and decided to throw a temper tantrum by stopping the automatic payments. But she does not own this building. You cannot evict a business just because the guarantor is acting emotionally unstable. Please escort her out before I have my legal team file a harassment lawsuit against your entire department. He crossed his arms over his chest, looking around the room to ensure the wealthy investors were watching him handle the situation like a true boss. Dominique stood beside him, nodding vigorously, her diamond earrings catching the pink neon light. Exactly, she chimed in, her voice shrill and desperate. She is just trying to embarrass me in front of my guests. Make her leave. Deputy Harris did not even blink. He simply lowered the folded legal document and looked directly at me silently, handing the floor over to the actual authority in the room. I stepped forward, closing the physical distance between myself and Kendrick. I unzipped my leather portfolio and reached inside. I did not pull out a standard lease agreement. I pulled out a heavy document bound with thick blue legal backing and stamped heavily with the raised gold seal of the county clerk office. I walked over to the custom marble reception desk, moving past the extravagant floral arrangements, and slammed the document down onto the smooth surface. The heavy thud resonated through the quiet room. Kendrick's smug smile faltered slightly as his eyes darted down to the paperwork. I strongly suggest you read the top line of that document, Kendrick, I said, my voice projecting clearly over the wireless microphone still gripped in my left hand. Because the anonymous holding company you thought you could ignore actually has a sole managing member. And you are looking right at her. Kendrick leaned forward, his eyes scanning the bold black text. His jaw visibly tightened as he read the words, commercial property deed, and saw my full legal name printed clearly on the ownership line. I stepped closer to him, looking directly into his panicked eyes. I am not the guarantor, Kendrick. I stated, my tone absolutely frigid and unyielding. I am your landlord. I own the ground you are standing on. I own the walls surrounding you. I own the roof over your head. The 7-day grace period expired 3 hours ago. You do not have a lease, you do not have a business, and right now, you are criminally trespassing on my private property. The color completely drained from his face. The absolute finality of my statement hung in the air like a heavy curtain dropping on a stage play. The wealthy investors Kendrick had spent the entire evening schmoozing did not need to hear another word. They were seasoned business professionals who instantly recognized a massive financial liability when they saw one. The older men in tailored suits immediately set their crystal champagne flutes down on the nearest tables and began backing away from the DJ booth, subtly making their way toward the exit. The local Atlanta influencers, always hungry for viral content, held their smartphones higher, capturing every single second of the spectacular meltdown. The glamorous illusion of the Lumiere Med Spa expansion was disintegrating right in front of their eyes. Dominique looked around the room, her chest heaving, as panic finally shattered her delusion. She saw her high-profile guests leaving. She saw the cameras recording her failure. She turned toward my mother, her face completely distorted by desperation. "Mom, do something!" Dominique shrieked, stomping her foot on the floor like a spoiled toddler. "She cannot do this to me. Tell them to stop. Tell her to give me my building back." Elaine snapped out of her frozen state. Her silver sequin dress sparkled aggressively as she pushed her way through the remaining crowd, her face completely flushed with pure rage. She could not comprehend the legal reality of the situation. She only saw that her golden child was being publicly humiliated, and her instinct was to attack the source of that humiliation, just as she had done my entire life. "You vindictive, evil little girl!" Elaine screamed, marching directly toward me with her hands clenched into tight fists. "I told you to stay away from this family. You are destroying your sister life out of pure jealousy." Before I could even brace myself, Elaine lunged forward, raising her right hand high into the air to strike me across the face in front of the entire room. But her hand never made contact. Deputy Harris moved with lightning speed, stepping smoothly between us. He caught my mother's wrist firmly in his hand, stopping the slap mid-air. "Ma'am, you need to step back immediately," the deputy ordered, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "If you attempt to strike this woman again, I will place you in handcuffs and arrest you for assault right here in front of your entire congregation." Elaine gasped, yanking her arm back as if she had been burned. She stumbled backward, clutching her chest in shock. The church aunties standing near the buffet table gasped collectively, utterly scandalized by the sight of their pristine choir director nearly assaulting her own daughter and being reprimanded by armed law enforcement. The public humiliation was complete. Elaine looked around the room, realizing that her perfectly crafted image of the ideal Christian matriarch was completely destroyed. Pastor Thomas was staring at her with profound disappointment, shaking his head slowly. She had absolutely no control over the narrative anymore. With my mother thoroughly neutralized and retreating into stunned silence, I turned my attention back to the business at hand. I signaled to the commercial locksmith who had been standing patiently near the entrance. He immediately unlatched his heavy steel toolbox and walked straight toward the massive double glass doors at the front of the clinic. The crowd parted for him as he pulled out his electric drill. The loud whining sound of metal grinding against metal filled the reception area as he began swiftly removing the primary deadbolts. The visual reality of the locks being physically drilled out of the doors finally broke through the last remaining barriers of Dominique delusion. She watched the metal shavings fall to the floor, her eyes wide with mounting terror. "You cannot lock me out!" she cried, rushing toward the front doors before Deputy Harris stepped in her path to block her. "All of my expensive laser machines are in there. My customer files are in there. My entire inventory of premium injectables is locked in those refrigerators. You are stealing my livelihood, Charmaine. You are a monster." I walked slowly toward her, keeping my posture completely straight and my expression entirely devoid of sympathy. "I am not stealing anything, Dominique," I replied, my voice steady and cold. "The law is very clear regarding commercial evictions and abandoned property left on the premises after a formal notice period has expired. Because you failed to vacate the building within the legally mandated 7-day window, every single piece of medical equipment, every chair, every mirror, and every vial of product inside these walls now legally belongs to the landlord to offset the cost of your unpaid rent and outstanding debts. And since I am the landlord, your inventory is now my inventory." Kendrick tried to step forward again, but the second deputy immediately placed a hand on his taser, silently warning the fake crypto-millionaire to stay exactly where he was. "You are insane!" Kendrick stammered, his voice cracking with genuine fear. "You cannot seize $500,000 worth of medical equipment over a missed rent payment." "Watch me," I said simply. I looked down at my wristwatch, checking the precise time. Then I looked back up at my sister, whose perfectly applied makeup was now running down her face in dark streaks of mascara. "I am giving you exactly 10 minutes to go into your back office, retrieve your personal purse, your car keys, and your cell phone. Anything else you attempt to carry out of this building will be considered theft of my property, and these deputies will arrest you on the spot. Your 10 minutes starts right now." Dominique let out a gut-wrenching sob, finally realizing that the game was entirely over. She turned and sprinted awkwardly down the hallway toward her office, weeping hysterically. The locksmith finished installing the first new heavy-duty deadbolt. The empire she claimed to build by herself was officially seized. The consequences of their profound arrogance had finally arrived to crush them completely tonight. They had lost absolutely everything they valued. Dominique stopped crying for a brief moment and turned back to face me, her sorrow rapidly morphing back into blistering anger. She pointed a trembling finger at my chest, her voice cracking as she accused me of not just destroying her business, but actively trying to ruin her marriage out of pure spite. She screamed that I was a bitter woman who could not stand to see her happy with a man who truly loved and provided for her. Kendrick stood behind her, nodding in agreement, still trying to project an air of superiority, despite the deputies standing mere feet away. He told the remaining crowd that I was mentally unstable and obsessed with their perfect relationship. I did not argue with them. I simply pulled my smartphone out of my pocket, unlocked it, and opened the encrypted folder containing the forensic audit. I looked up at the massive flat-screen television Dominique had mounted on the waiting room wall, which was currently playing a looping promotional video of her premium services. I tapped the screen mirroring icon on my device and seamlessly hijacked the television display. The promotional video vanished instantly, replaced by the stark white background of Kendrick private bank statements. The font was massive, perfectly legible to everyone still standing in the crowded room. I zoomed in on the recurring monthly transfers. "You want to talk about your perfect marriage, Dominique?" I asked, my voice echoing coldly through the microphone. "Let us talk about exactly where my $13,000 went every single month. It certainly did not go toward your commercial lease." I directed the attention of the stunned crowd to the television. I highlighted the $8,000 wire transfers that occurred on the 5th of every single month without fail. I explained clearly and methodically that Kendrick was siphoning her business funds into a private account. Then, I swiped to the next image displaying the recipient information. The name Destiny, located in Miami, Florida, appeared in bold letters on the glowing screen. I swiped again, showing the itemized credit card receipts for luxury hotel suites, oceanfront dinners, and designer handbags shipped directly to Destiny residential address. I read the dates aloud, cross-referencing them with the times Kendrick had supposedly traveled out of state for his highly important cryptocurrency conferences. The crowd gasped as the undeniable proof of his massive infidelity was broadcast in high definition. Kendrick's jaw dropped open, his eyes darting frantically between the television screen and his wife. He tried to lunge forward to snatch the phone from my hand, but Deputy Harris immediately blocked his path, ordering him to stand down. I looked directly at Dominique, whose face had gone completely slack with raw shock. "Your husband is not a billionaire investor, Dominique," I stated calmly. "He is a parasite who used my money to fund a very expensive mistress while you played pretend on the internet." The absolute truth was finally and completely undeniable to everyone watching them today. For several agonizing seconds, Dominique simply stared at the massive television screen, her mind desperately struggling to process the devastating reality of the financial documents displayed before her. The pristine illusion of her incredibly perfect marriage shattered into a million jagged pieces right in front of her eyes. She slowly turned her head to look at Kendrick, her entire body trembling with a mixture of profound heartbreak and rapidly boiling fury. Kendrick held his hands up in a defensive gesture, his previous arrogance entirely evaporating under her terrifying gaze. "Baby," he stammered, taking a cautious step backward. "It is not what it looks like. She is lying. Charmaine fabricated those documents to frame me because she is jealous of what we have. It is all fake." But Dominique was not entirely stupid when it came to reading her own husband. She recognized the exact dates of the Miami hotel charges. She knew those were the exact weekends he had claimed to be closing massive cryptocurrency deals in Florida, while she sat at home alone defending his honor to anyone who would listen. "You liar," Dominique shrieked, her voice tearing through the absolute silence of the room. The sound was guttural, filled with the raw pain of ultimate betrayal. She lunged at him with astonishing speed, her manicured hands striking his chest violently. "You used my business to fund some cheap woman in Miami. You stole from me." Kendrick tried to grab her wrists to stop the assault, but she fought him like a wild animal. The local influencers who had not already fled the party eagerly pushed their way to the front of the crowd, holding their smartphones high in the air to capture every single second of the spectacular domestic collapse. The camera flashes illuminated their screaming match like strobe lights in a nightclub. My mother Elaine stood completely paralyzed near the catering tables, clutching her silver sequin gown in absolute horror as she watched her beloved golden couple violently tear each other apart in public. Kendrick finally managed to push Dominique away, his face flushed red with anger and acute embarrassment. "Stop acting like a crazy person," he yelled, straightening his expensive designer jacket. "You knew we were struggling financially. I had to blow off some steam. You are so obsessed with your stupid social media image that you never even paid attention to me anyway." The sheer audacity of his pathetic excuse sent Dominique into a complete frenzy. She grabbed a crystal champagne flute from a nearby high-top table and hurled it directly at his head. The glass missed him by mere inches, shattering loudly against the decorative mirror behind him. The deputies instantly moved in, grabbing Dominique by the arms to physically restrain her before she could cause any serious bodily harm. The flawless facade they had spent years meticulously constructing was now nothing more than a humiliating digital spectacle destined to be broadcast to the entire world before this disastrous evening was finally over. Just as the deputies secured a firm hold on my hysterical sister, a new source of absolute chaos suddenly erupted from the street outside. Through the massive glass storefront windows of the clinic, bright yellow strobe lights began flashing aggressively, casting long, frantic shadows across the red carpet Dominique had so proudly rolled out. The few remaining party guests turned their heads toward the source of the commotion. A large, heavy-duty commercial tow truck was rapidly backing into the VIP parking area, positioned directly in front of the building. The driver masterfully maneuvered the massive rig until its heavy steel towing armature was aligned perfectly beneath the front bumper of the pristine midnight black Rolls-Royce Cullinan that Kendrick had rented to flaunt his supposed wealth. Kendrick noticed the flashing yellow lights reflecting against the clinic windows and immediately whipped his head around. His eyes widened in absolute terror as he realized what was happening. He completely abandoned his violently weeping wife, shoved his way past the remaining onlookers, and sprinted frantically through the glass doors out into the cool night air. "Hey!" he screamed, waving his arms wildly as he ran down the red carpet. "Stop the truck right now!" "What do you think you are doing? You cannot tow my car?" The tow truck operator, a large man wearing a reflective safety vest and holding an electronic clipboard, stepped calmly out of the cab. He did not look intimidated in the slightest by the screaming man in the expensive designer tracksuit running toward him. He simply pressed a button on a remote control, and the hydraulic lift whirred loudly as it hoisted the front wheels of the luxury vehicle off the pavement. "I am not towing your car, buddy," the operator replied loudly, his voice carrying clearly into the quieted reception area where we were all watching. "I am repossessing property belonging to the rental agency. Your credit card authorization bounced 3 times this afternoon, and your secondary backup accounts all came back completely frozen. You are in default, and the agency wants their asset returned immediately." Kendrick stopped dead in his tracks, his chest heaving violently as he stared at the suspended vehicle. The entire city block was watching him. The influencers who had followed him outside were now live streaming his ultimate disgrace. The billionaire crypto investor did not even have enough money to cover a basic rental car deposit. He looked utterly pathetic standing on the sidewalk, entirely stripped of his rented armor. His Gucci loafers scraped against the concrete as he stepped back in total defeat. He did not fight the repo man. He just stood there completely frozen, watching his fake persona get unceremoniously towed away into the dark night. I watched the scene unfold from inside my newly reclaimed building, a deep sense of absolute peace settling over me. The comprehensive destruction of their massive delusion was finally complete. The perfect couple had officially lost every single thing they possessed tonight forever. The heavy silence that followed the departure of the tow truck was broken by the sound of my mother's heels clicking rapidly across the marble floor. Elaine marched toward me, her face pale and her entire body shaking with a fury I had never seen before. She bypassed her sobbing daughter and her humiliated son-in-law, focusing all of her venom entirely on me. She stopped just inches from my face, her chest heaving underneath her silver sequin gown. "You are going straight to hell for this, Charmaine," she hissed, her voice trembling with absolute hatred. "You are an evil, vindictive demon. You came into this building tonight with the sole intention of destroying your own family. You humiliated your sister in front of her peers. You ruined her husband's reputation. You dragged the police into a private family matter just to satisfy your own sick, twisted jealousy. You are no daughter of mine, and God will punish you for the wicked things you have done here tonight." She pointed a shaking finger at my face, tears of rage finally spilling over her eyelashes and ruining her immaculate makeup. I did not step back. I did not flinch or look away. I simply stared back at her with completely dead eyes. The religious guilt trips and the constant manipulation that used to terrify me when I was a little girl had absolutely no effect on me anymore. I looked at this woman who had spent my entire life prioritizing a fabricated social image over her own flesh and blood. She was still desperately clinging to the illusion, still fiercely protecting the parasite that was actively draining her dry, simply because she could not bear to admit that she had been wrong about him. "You are right about one thing, Mom," I replied, my voice dangerously calm and completely devoid of any emotion. "I am not your daughter anymore. But you are completely wrong about everything else. I did not destroy this family tonight. I just turned on the lights so everyone could finally see the rot that was already here." Elaine scoffed, her lip curling into an ugly sneer. "How dare you speak to me about rot? You are the one who locked your own sister out of her business. You are the one who projected those disgusting lies on the television to tear apart her marriage. You did this." I slowly unzipped the front pocket of my leather portfolio one more time. The final piece of evidence was sitting right on top, printed on heavy legal paper. "No, Mom," I said softly, pulling the thick stack of documents out and holding them firmly in my right hand. "I did not do this to you. I tried to warn you at the cafe, but you called me a liar. You chose to blindly trust a man who used your own pride as a weapon against you. Let us see exactly how much you truly love your absolutely perfect son-in-law after you carefully read this exact legal document right now in front of everyone here." I thrust the heavy stack of legal documents directly into her chest, forcing her to grab them or let them fall to the floor. Elaine looked down at the paperwork, her hands trembling so violently that the pages rustled loudly in the quiet room. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice losing some of its venom as a creeping sense of dread began to take hold. "I want you to look at the second page," I instructed coldly. "Look at the signature line at the very bottom." Elaine fumbled with the pages, flipping to the indicated section. Her eyes scanned the text, and I watched the exact moment her brain registered what she was seeing. Her breath hitched in her throat. "That is my signature," she whispered, her brow furrowing in deep confusion. "But I never signed any commercial loan documents for the med spa. Why is my name on this?" I stepped closer, leaning in so only she could hear the devastating truth. "You did not sign it, Mom. Kendrick forged your signature. He stole your social security number and your financial identity." Elaine shook her head frantically, refusing to accept the words coming out of my mouth. "No," she stammered, looking wildly toward Kendrick, who was currently trying to quietly inch his way toward the back exit. "Kendrick would never do that. He is a millionaire. He does not need my money." "He is not a millionaire, Mom," I corrected her sharply, forcing her to look back at the documents. "Look at the collateral listed on that loan agreement. He used your fully paid-off colonial home in Fairfield to secure a $150,000 predatory loan. And he took that money to pay for his luxury rental cars, his designer tracksuits, and his mistress in Miami." Elaine's face turned the color of ash as the truth settled in. She clutched the papers so tightly her knuckles turned entirely white. "You are lying," she gasped, though her voice lacked any real conviction. The proof was literally resting in her hands. "I am not sending you to hell, Mom," I stated, delivering the final fatal blow to her reality. "Kendrick is. He took out a second mortgage on your house and he has not made a single payment in 4 months. The loan is entirely in default and beyond saving. Turn to the very last page of that packet. Elaine slowly flipped to the back, her eyes landing on the official notice of default and intent to foreclose issued by the bank. Your house goes into foreclosure next Tuesday, I told her, my voice echoing the absolute finality of her ruin. The bank is seizing your property. You are going to lose the home Dad worked his entire life to pay for, all because you enabled a scammer and refused to listen to your actual daughter. Elaine let out a choked, agonizing gasp. Her knees buckled beneath her, and she collapsed onto the floor, the forged documents scattering across the marble tiles around her. The pristine church matriarch was entirely and completely broken beyond any repair. While my mother sobbed on the floor, mourning the imminent loss of her home, I caught a sudden blur of movement out of the corner of my eye. Kendrick had realized the absolute gravity of the situation. He knew forging a signature on a federal loan document was not a civil dispute. It was a severe felony. With everyone distracted by Elaine completely collapsing, he decided to make his move. He turned away from the crowd and began sprinting toward the rear emergency exit door near the restrooms. He was abandoning his weeping wife, his ruined mother-in-law, and his entire fake empire in a desperate bid to save his own skin. I immediately pointed toward the hallway. "Deputy!" I yelled, my voice cutting sharply through the chaos. "He is running. He committed massive identity theft and federal wire fraud. Do not let him leave this building." Deputy Harris and his partner reacted with incredible speed. They bolted past the catering tables and the shattered champagne glass, intercepting Kendrick just as his hand grabbed the metal crash bar of the emergency exit. The second deputy grabbed Kendrick by the shoulder of his expensive designer jacket and spun him around, slamming him forcefully against the drywall. Kendrick yelled out in surprise, struggling weakly against the officer grip. "Get your hands off me!" he shouted, his voice cracking with pure panic. "I did not do anything wrong. This is a misunderstanding. I have lawyers." Deputy Harris swiftly pulled Kendrick's arms behind his back, the sharp metallic click of handcuffs echoing loudly down the hallway. "You can explain that to the fraud detectives down at the precinct, sir," Harris said sternly, securing the cuffs tightly around Kendrick's wrists. "Right now, you are being detained on suspicion of identity theft and financial fraud." Kendrick's face was pressed against the wall, his eyes wide with absolute terror, as the reality of his future finally dawned on him. Dominique watched from the reception area, her hands covering her mouth in sheer horror as she witnessed her perfect husband being treated like a common criminal. Remaining influencers captured every angle, guaranteeing Kendrick's arrest would be the top trending video in Atlanta by tomorrow morning. The deputies marched him back through the main lobby, parading him past his utterly ruined family and the few remaining investors who were shaking their heads in disgust. As they escorted him out the front glass doors, the red and blue flashing lights of the patrol cars outside illuminated his face, highlighting the absolute panic and defeat written across his features. The deafening silence inside the clinic was broken only by the sound of my mother, uncontrollable weeping, and Dominique, pathetic, breathless sobs. I stood alone in the center of my newly reclaimed commercial building, surrounded by the total devastation they had brought upon themselves. The party had ended exactly as it was destined to, in flashing police lights and the complete, undeniable destruction of their toxic parasitic empire. The morning sun poured through the massive glass storefront of my newly reclaimed commercial building, casting long, warm beams across the polished marble floor. It was exactly 8 o'clock, the morning after the disastrous grand reopening party. The heavy scent of expensive perfume and spilled champagne had already begun to dissipate, replaced by the faint, comforting smell of the citrus cleaner I had used to wipe down the front reception desk. I sat in a sleek leather chair that previously belonged to Dominique, holding a steaming cup of black coffee from the cafe down the street. The absolute silence of the empty space was beautiful. There were no thumping bass lines, no flashing neon lights, and absolutely no toxic family members demanding my money. The new heavy-duty deadbolts the locksmith had installed were firmly locked, securing my property completely. I took a slow sip of my coffee, relishing the profound sense of safety and control that washed over me. For the first time in my life, I was not anticipating the next crisis I would be expected to solve. My phone resting on the marble desk suddenly began to vibrate violently against the hard surface. The caller ID displayed Dominique name. I let it ring for a few seconds, simply watching the screen flash before I calmly reached out and answered the call. I did not say hello, I just listened. On the other end of the line, Dominique was weeping hysterically. The manicured, arrogant tone she had weaponized against me for decades was completely gone, replaced by the panicked gasps of a terrified child. Charmaine. She sobbed, her voice cracking pitifully. Please do not hang up. I have absolutely nowhere to go. The police seized Kendrick bank accounts this morning because they were tied to the fraud investigation. Our landlord locked me out of the apartment because Kendrick used a fake wire transfer to pay the rent last month. I am sitting in my car with nothing but the clothes on my back. I need you. I just need to sleep on your couch for a few nights until I can figure this out. Please, Charmaine, you are my sister. I listened to her desperate pleas, feeling a strange detachment from her pain. Yesterday, she had proudly told a roomful of people that I was a bitter, jealous woman trying to ruin her life. She had demanded I be thrown out into the street. Now she was begging for access to my home. The sheer hypocrisy was staggering, but it no longer held any power over my emotions. Dominique. I said, my voice perfectly level and devoid of sympathy. You spent years treating me like an ATM while publicly humiliating me to boost your own ego. You chose to build your life on a foundation of lies, and now that foundation has completely collapsed. I am not your safety net anymore. You are a self-made boss. I suggest you start acting like one. Charmaine, please, she shrieked, but I was already pulling the phone away from my ear. No, I replied firmly. I tapped the red button ending the call and immediately blocked her number from my phone. The boundary was finally and permanently set. The legal and financial consequences of that night unfolded rapidly over the next several weeks, effectively burying whatever remained of their fraudulent empire. Kendrick was formally indicted on multiple federal charges, including aggravated identity theft, bank fraud, and wire fraud. Because he had used the United States postal system and interstate wire transfers to funnel my stolen money to his mistress in Miami, the federal prosecutors took an extreme interest in his case. His fake cryptocurrency portfolio was exposed in court as a massive Ponzi scheme he had used to swindle several other vulnerable members of our community. Facing decades in federal prison, his expensive private lawyers quickly abandoned him when his retainer checks bounced. He was assigned a public defender and remanded to the county jail without bail, entirely stripped of his designer clothes and his rented luxury vehicles. He went from posing in front of champagne towers to wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, completely forgotten by the wealthy investors he had tried so desperately to impress. Dominique, completely devoid of my financial backing and her husband's stolen funds, was forced to confront the harsh reality of her actual capabilities. Her entire brand was built on the illusion of wealth, and without money to maintain her physical appearance or buy social media engagement, her followers quickly abandoned her for the next trending influencer. Facing mounting personal debts and the threat of civil lawsuits from angry vendors, she had no choice but to enter the actual workforce. The woman who had proudly called herself a self-made CEO was now working a minimum-wage retail job at a discount clothing store in a strip mall. She spent her days folding cheap sweaters and dealing with demanding customers, a brutal demotion from the glamorous life she felt inherently entitled to. Meanwhile, I systematically liquidated the entire contents of Lumiere Medspa to zero out her massive ledger. I hired a commercial auction house to inventory every single item left inside the building. The premium laser machines, the custom medical refrigerators, the high-end waiting room furniture, and even the neon signs were auctioned off to legitimate medical practitioners. The proceeds from the auction entirely covered the hundreds of thousands of dollars in commercial lease payments and payroll expenses I had lost over the past 3 years. I deposited the massive check into my high-yield savings account, officially closing the book on my financial entanglement with my sister. I had recouped my losses entirely, leaving Dominique with absolutely nothing to show for her years of entitlement and cruelty. The scales of justice had finally balanced themselves, and I was entirely free to move forward without the heavy anchor of their constant demands dragging me down. I watched the auction trucks haul away the last of the velvet waiting room chairs, feeling an immense satisfaction in knowing the debt was finally paid in full. The financial bleeding had officially stopped, and my pristine credit score remained completely untouched by their catastrophic failures. The most tragic fallout, however, belonged entirely to my mother Elaine. The Tuesday following the disastrous party, the bank officially executed the foreclosure on our sprawling colonial home in Fairfield. I did not drive down to watch it happen, but Aunt Shirley gleefully relayed the details to me in a highly detailed voicemail that I listened to purely out of morbid curiosity. The county sheriff arrived at the property with a moving crew, forcing Elaine to pack her designer bags and sequin dresses into cardboard boxes, while the neighbors watched from their manicured lawns. The house she had prized above her own children was padlocked, her perfect sanctuary officially repossessed due to her absolute refusal to see the truth about her golden son-in-law. Later that same evening, my phone rang. It was Elaine. She was calling from a cheap motel room, her voice shaking with a mixture of despair and lingering entitlement. "Charmaine," she cried, attempting to use the same maternal guilt trips that had worked so flawlessly when I was younger. "The bank took everything. I am living out of suitcases. You have to help your mother. You own that massive commercial building now. You have millions of dollars. I need you to buy me a luxury condo downtown so I can maintain my standing in the community. You owe me this much after what you did to our family." I sat on my comfortable couch in my secure apartment, completely unbothered by her tears. "I owe you absolutely nothing, Mom," I replied calmly. "You watched Kendrick steal my money to fund his mistress. You allowed Dominique to treat me like garbage. And when I tried to warn you about the forged loan documents, you called me a jealous liar. You enabled the parasite that destroyed this family because you cared more about having a wealthy son-in-law than you cared about your actual daughter. You chose the illusion, and now you have to live in the reality it created. I will not buy you a condo. Do not call me again." I hung up the phone and blocked her number, severing the final toxic tie. With no money and her credit ruined by the massive foreclosure, Elaine was forced to rent a tiny, cramped one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. Her spectacular fall from grace was the primary topic of conversation at the Sunday church services she used to dominate. The same aunties she had previously weaponized against me now whispered behind her back, mocking her gullibility and her sudden plunge into poverty. Stripped of her colonial home, her wealthy image, and her position as the pristine choir director, Elaine was completely ostracized by the community she had sacrificed me to impress. She ended up exactly where her vanity and cruelty had led her, utterly alone, in a tiny apartment surrounded only by the faded sequin dresses she had nowhere left to wear. She had traded her actual family for a glittering lie, and in the end, the lie had cost her absolutely everything she ever valued. As the dust settled over the following months, the massive public spectacle of Kendrick's arrest actually worked entirely in my professional favor. The initial wave of negative online reviews generated by Dominique followers was swiftly replaced by a massive outpouring of support. Once the local news outlets picked up the story of the cryptocurrency fraud and the identity theft, the truth about who was actually the victim became undeniable. The vice president of engineering at my tech company, Mr. Sterling, personally apologized for doubting me and publicly backed my integrity. My software development career skyrocketed, but my financial independence truly solidified through my real estate investments. The commercial plaza that I had seized back from my sister did not sit empty for very long. Within a month, I signed a long-term, highly lucrative lease agreement with a brilliant local pediatrician who wanted to open a community health clinic. Dr. Eris was a hard-working, honest woman who paid her rent on time and treated her employees with actual respect. Seeing the space that was once a monument to Dominique vanity transformed into a place of genuine healing, brought me an incredible amount of joy. The rental income from the clinic, combined with the returns from the auction, completely replaced my tech salary, giving me the ultimate freedom to work because I wanted to, not because I had to. I officially established my own financial consulting firm on the side, specifically dedicated to helping women protect their assets from predatory relatives and bad investments. My client list grew exponentially, filled with people who had heard my story and wanted someone who understood the absolute necessity of financial boundaries. The building that was once a source of constant stress and a financial black hole for me was now a beacon of actual community service and my own personal triumph. Every time I drove past the clinic, seeing families walking in and out of the freshly painted doors, I felt a deep sense of pride. I had taken a toxic situation and cultivated something beautiful and sustainable from its ashes. I was no longer hiding in the shadows, quietly paying off minimum balances for ungrateful family members. I was standing firmly in the light, building genuine generational wealth that nobody could ever forge a signature to steal from me again. Moving forward, starting right now, today, completely, forever and ever, without fail, entirely. In the quiet moments of my new life, I spent a lot of time reflecting on the complex dynamics of the African American family, particularly the overwhelming expectations placed on the women. For generations, we have been conditioned to embrace the trope of the strong Black woman. We are taught from a very young age that our primary value lies in our ability to endure pain, carry the heavy financial burdens of our relatives, and keep the family secrets safely hidden behind closed doors. We are expected to be the unbreakable mules, constantly pulling the weight of those who refuse to walk on their own 2 feet. If we dare to prioritize our own peace or protect our own bank accounts, we are instantly labeled as selfish, bitter, or traitors to our culture. My mother, Elaine, had weaponized that exact cultural expectation against me for my entire life. She demanded my silence and my money under the guise of family loyalty, while actively facilitating my destruction to prop up a man who was stealing from us both. But the absolute truth I discovered through this entire ordeal is that enduring abuse is not a measure of strength. True strength is having the profound courage to look at a toxic system and completely dismantle it. It is understanding that you cannot save people who are entirely committed to their own delusions. You have to be willing to cut the dead weight, even if that dead weight shares your DNA. Letting go of the guilt was a difficult process, but every day without their chaos is a reminder that I made the right choice. I redefined what family means to me. Family is not an unconditional obligation to suffer. It is built on mutual respect, honesty, and genuine support. By walking away from my biological relatives, I did not lose my family. I finally found myself. I broke the generational curse of financial abuse and emotional manipulation, ensuring that my future and the future of anyone I choose to bring into my life will be built on a foundation of absolute truth and healthy boundaries. I learned that my peace of mind is the most valuable asset I own, and I refuse to ever let anyone bankrupt my spirit again. The emotional freedom I gained is worth far more than any commercial property I could ever own, completely, now and forever, always. Have you ever had to choose your own survival over family loyalty? Have you ever found yourself carrying the heavy burdens of people who never appreciated your sacrifices, only to realize that stepping away was the only way to save yourself? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and I know there are so many of you out there fighting these same invisible battles within your own homes. You are not alone, and you are not selfish for choosing your own peace over pleasing others. Like and subscribe if you believe in setting unbreakable boundaries and protecting your own energy. Share this video with anyone who might need a reminder that it is perfectly acceptable to walk away from toxic environments, no matter who is asking you to stay. Your life belongs to you, and you hold the pen to write your own ending. Thank you so much for listening to my story, for supporting my journey, and for being part of a community that values truth over comfortable lies. I will see you in the next video with more stories of resilience and empowerment very soon. Take care, everyone out there, safely starting today.